I don't remember how long the crack had been there for. It was one of those slow, insidious ones that spread like creeping vine, stealing away at the foundation. I should have noticed sooner. How could I not have seen it? My marriage was falling apart, and I was too busy tending to the garden to notice. You see, I thought I had a pretty good life. 2 kids, a mortgage, a husband who loved me. Sure, my husband Michael didn't talk about his feelings much, and he'd been working such long hours lately that I barely saw him. But we had our routines. He'd come home, watch the kids while I cooked dinner. We'd eat in silence sometimes, but it was comfortable. There were no fights, no surprises. Everything was fine. But then the silence started to feel heavy, the pauses stretched on, and I began to feel like a single mother. Sometimes when I'd go to tuck myself into bed next to Michael, I'd reach out and touch him, hoping to wake something in him, only to be met with cold skin and an unmoving body. Then one morning, I woke up early and went into the kitchen to make coffee. And that's when I heard it, a steady drop, drip, drip, drip. I turned around and looked at the sink. A small crack had appeared at the base and water was slowly leaking out. I sighed. It was just another thing on my list. And yet, when the plumber came that afternoon and tightened the bolt, I felt tears prickling behind my eyes. Maybe it was because I'd been so tired, or maybe because hearing the water turn off brought back the sound of silence in the house. As the days passed, the silence grew louder and the leak began to worsen. Drip, drip, drip. Then one day, a new man came to fix it. His name was Mateo, and he was young, maybe a few years younger than my husband. He had kind eyes, a warm smile, and hands that lingered just a little too long on mine when he introduced himself. When Michael came home that day, he didn't even ask what was going on. He just nodded his head towards me and went upstairs to change into more comfortable clothes. I wanted to tell him about Mateo, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. What was there to say? The first rule of fixing a leaky pipe is to turn off the water. I watched Mateo come and go every week. The sight of his worn toolbox became a comfort, and the sound of his humming filled the silent house. Then one Saturday, my husband left town on a business trip. Just before he left, he gave me a list of things to buy from the grocery store. It was always the same. Bread, milk, eggs, no room for love. And when I handed him the list, I noticed his eyes were distant. Was he thinking about me or about work? About Mateo. That afternoon, the phone rang, and it was my sister asking if I wanted to go out with her and some friends. I said sure. I needed to get out of the house. I needed to breathe. That's when I noticed Mateo had left his phone here. You know, I never meant for any of this to happen. I really didn't. I wouldn't have gone out with Mateo if my husband wasn't away. But I did, and by the time I got home, the food was digested and the wine was forgotten. All I could think about was Mateo, and when I heard the rumble of his truck outside, my heart pounded in my chest. I opened the door, and there he was, wiping his hands on a rag and smiling at me. And in that moment, I knew I wanted him to come inside. I wanted him to look around at all the rooms in my house, at the pictures on the walls, at the shoes scattered on the floor, at the unopened Christmas presents under the tree. I wanted him to see everything I'd been hiding. He walked in and looked around. Then he took a step closer to me. "Do you need help organizing?" he asked, and I shook my head. Instead, I reached out and touched his arm. I traced the line of his bicep, surprised by the way my fingers fit there. It felt so right. And when he looked down at me, his eyes held a question I couldn't answer. "I haven't finished fixing the sink," he said finally, and I led him to the kitchen, both of us silent as we went. In the days that followed, I started looking forward to Saturdays. Michael was gone every weekend, so it was easy for me to let Mateo in. Once the work was done, he'd stay and we'd eat takeout food in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now, like the quiet after a well-told joke. I enjoyed it. We found ways to steal moments together. A brush of hands when we pored over a magazine, a shared laugh when the kids pretended to be dinosaurs, a lingering kiss when I thought no one was watching. One Saturday, Mateo was helping me clean the gutters. We stood on the ladder side by side, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. I leaned against the house and closed my eyes, inhaling the crisp air. When I opened them again, Mateo was staring at me, his gaze intense. Before I could say anything, he cupped my face in his hands and kissed me. It was a searing, passionate kiss that left me breathless. And when he pulled away, his eyes were dark with desire. "Don't," I whispered, and he obeyed, dropping his hands to his sides. We finished cleaning the gutters in silence, and when I went to pay him, his fingers brushed mine and a jolt ran through me. Those stolen moments continued. The laundry room became our place. While the dryer hummed in the background, its heat mingling with the scent of fabric softener, we'd kiss, sometimes passionately, sometimes hesitantly. The guilt would always come after. As soon as I heard the garage door open, I'd push him away and rush to unlock the front door. Then I'd do my best to ignore him when Michael was there, even though his eyes would meet mine across the room. The double life I was living became exhausting. By day, I was the perfect wife, baking cookies for bake sales, organizing carpools, and fixing leaky faucets. By night, I was a lover, meeting Mateo in the laundry room, feeling the heat of his body against mine, losing myself in the moment. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't pull away. I didn't want to. But the strain of keeping my two lives separate began to take its toll. One evening, I was getting the kids ready for bed. My hands were full of books and bedtime stories, and I could hear Mateo downstairs talking to Michael. They were discussing the latest developments in plumbing technology. My husband sounded interested, and it made my stomach twist. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make them both look at me, to see me, to acknowledge me. But instead, I stayed silent. As I tucked the kids into bed, I felt tears prickling behind my eyes. I slipped out of their room and went to the laundry room. I had to tell Mateo it was over. But when I opened the door, it was empty. On the counter was a note. It read, "Gone to get supplies. Be back soon." Supplies. Was that what he was getting? More supplies to keep building the wall between us? I crumpled the note in my hand, anger replacing the tears. I didn't want supplies. I wanted him. But more than that, I wanted to be seen. Seen for who I was, for what I'd become. Days turned into weeks, and the crack in the foundation grew wider. The leak in the kitchen was still there, drip, 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 a constant reminder of what was breaking inside me. The silence in the house had become deafening, and in the quiet moments, I'd replay our last conversation in my head. "I haven't seen you all week," I'd said to Mateo. "What are we doing?" "We," he corrected me. "We're nothing. I'm sorry. Nothing. Was that what we were? Nothing to each other, nothing to the world." I'd pushed him away, hadn't I? Well, now there was nothing left. When Michael came home that weekend, I didn't hide the fact that I was crying. He looked at me, his face etched with concern, and for the first time in a long time, he took me in his arms. "What's wrong?" He whispered, and I told him. I told him about Mateo, about the affair, about the way I'd been living. And as I spoke, the dam broke. All the tears, all the guilt, all the frustration came pouring out of me. When I was done, my husband held me tighter. "It's okay," he said. "It's going to be all right." Then he did something I never expected. He kissed me. It was a gentle kiss, full of tenderness and understanding. And in that moment, I knew I was loved. I was seen. I was held. I didn't have to pretend anymore. Weeks later, the leak in the kitchen was fixed. The house was quiet once more, but now it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a home. Michael and I had talked about what happened, about where we went wrong. We were seeing a therapist together, And as for Mateo, I never saw him again. But sometimes, just sometimes, when the dryer hums or the work light glows, I feel a spark of the past ignite within me. And I wonder, what if?